And good afternoon, and welcome to Questions About God in the Bible. Today's question comes from me. Sometimes when you're reading the scriptures, you run across something and it may cause you to have a question and you don't right off the top of your head know the answer. It's important to go find out the answer. I had such a moment reading in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, which is part of the Christmas story. Matthew is the only one who tells us about the visit of the wise men, the Magi, and the fact that Joseph gets up in the middle of the night when the angel tells him to take Mary and the child and escape to Egypt because Herod is going to try to kill him. And Joseph will do exactly that, and Matthew will record that when God says act, Joseph doesn't waste time. He doesn't wait till morning. They get up and leave that night, and they stay in Egypt for an unspecified amount of time until they hear that Herod is dead, and then they head back toward the Holy Land. And Matthew will record that Joseph intended to go toward Jerusalem until he heard that Herod's son Archelaus was going to be appointed to be the new Herod. And therefore he decided, nope, we're not going there. And he went back towards Nazareth, where he and Mary were originally from. And so let me pick up with the reading of Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 19. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So see, the angel's instruction is generic but specific. Go back to the land of Israel. Don't stay down here in Egypt. But where in Egypt is not specified. So Joseph is free to try to choose. We pick up the reading again. So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. The only reason Matthew would mention that detail would be if that's where Joseph initially intended to go and decides, whoops, that's not the best place to go, and then changes his mind. Otherwise, it makes no sense for it to be there. Well, why would Joseph want to go back towards Jerusalem and Bethlehem? Well, he and Mary are both descended from King David, and Joseph knows that Jesus is God's promised Messiah. And so he's probably thinking in terms of he needs to be near the temple and the temple system because that's where the kings are supposed to rule from. But because he's heard about Archelaus, Joseph will decide it's not God's timing. That's not the place to go. Now the question is, if not there, where? And Matthew gives us the following statement. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what had been said through the prophets. He will be called a Nazarene. That's the part that I had the question with. As it is said through the prophets, he will be called a Nazarene. In your rose books, for those of you who have rose books, and if you don't, I just really can't stress enough how valuable this little reference tool is to you in your understanding of scriptures. In the rose book, starting on page 129 and going for several pages thereafter, there are literally listed hundreds, plural, hundreds of prophecies about Jesus that were fulfilled. Well, I've just read in Matthew chapter 2 that he shall be called a Nazarene. When you look in that rose book or you do any other kind of search, whether you're looking in a concordance or you're looking on an online software, the phrase he shall be called a Nazarene isn't found anywhere in the Old Testament. Nowhere. Nada. Zip. So what does Matthew mean when he's giving the story of how Young Jesus and his family have now been told it's time to leave Egypt and come back home. But Joseph takes the family to Nazareth because the prophet said he shall be a Nazarene. I didn't know the answer to that. Now I have a little bit better understanding of it. The word Nazareth basically is from the root of Nazir, which is a set apart one. The idea of a Nazarite vow is all over the Old Testament. You'll find, for example, Samson, an Old Testament judge, having a Nazarite vow. You'll have several other people who have taken a Nazarite vow where they're not to be in the presence of the dead, they're not to ever cut their hair, and they're never to take strong drink, the set apart ones. The town of Nazareth means the set apart ones. But when you're looking throughout the Old Testament, nowhere does any prophet, not Elijah, Elisha, Samuel, Amos, Joel, any of them, make a specific prophecy that says the Messiah will be called a Nazarene. So what's Matthew referring to? He's probably referring to the fact that the Messiah is a set apart one, someone who is specifically assigned to that office. Isaiah 11:1 makes the prediction that the Messiah will be from the root of Jesse. So we know the family line. We know that God called Abraham out of all the peoples on the earth, and that Abraham's son Isaac, not his son Ishmael or any of the 6 sons that Abraham fathered by Keturah, just Isaac, Sarah's boy. Of Isaac's 2 sons, Esau and Jacob, just Jacob. Of Jacob's 12 sons, the kingship was supposed to come through specifically the line of Judah, and from Judah, specifically the clan of Jesse, and from there descended from King David. So Isaiah 11:1 talks about it being the root of Jesse, the person who's set apart for this specific task, who's anointed for this task, has to be from the root of Jesse. That Judges 13:5 talks about Samson being set apart by God for the mission of being a judge, because the angel appears to Samson's mother before she's even conceived him. It's another one of those, a woman's been barren for a long time and prays for a child, and in answer to the prayer, the woman discovers that she's going to have a child with a mission. Samson will be such a child. The prophet Samuel will be such a child. Sarah herself will wait until she's age 90 before God allows her womb to be opened for Isaac. And in Judges 13:5, Samson is referred to as being chosen for a specific mission, and his parents are told to set him apart with the Nazir, the Nazarite vow. And then in Isaiah 53:2, the word Netzer, which if we were transliterating it into English would be like Netzer, Netzer, it's the root that Nazareth comes from, as the set aside one. So even though there's no specific reference where a singular prophet made a specific prophecy that says Messiah shall be called a Nazarene, the tone of the prophecy is that people should be able to recognize the Messiah because he's going to be set apart. He'll be from a unique bloodline, and Jesus certainly is. He'll be born in a unique place that's described in Scripture, and that one is prophesied in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, that he would be born in Bethlehem, and that his mother and father now being both from the town of Nazareth, which is mentioned in Scripture in the New Testament, but not the Old. One of the reasons why when Jesus went home to Nazareth and preached his first sermon, which was from the prophet Isaiah chapter 61, and he told them, today the good news is fulfilled in your hearing. At first they were all excited. Why? Because they're all from Nazareth. And their thinking is that because we're from Nazareth, the place where the name means the set apart ones, any one of us could be the Messiah. And at first they liked Jesus's words. But the more he reveals to them that he is God's anointed Messiah, that he is God in the flesh, they get angry and want to run him out of town and want to basically throw him off a cliff, but it wasn't his time yet. So the reference to he shall be called a Nazarene, we don't find it specifically in the Old Testament, but the idea of somebody who's set apart and is described as being meeting all this criteria, we do find that in the Old Testament. And even in our New Testament, as Jesus is calling his disciples, he's up around the Sea of Galilee, and he's already called the fishermen brothers, James and John, and Peter and Andrew. And now Philip, who is from the nearby town of Bethsaida, has been called, and Philip will go and get his friend Nathanael. And Philip's invitation to Nathanael to come and meet this Messiah. Philip has already decided Jesus is that Messiah, and he's going to tell his friend about it. And he says, come and meet Jesus of Nazareth. And Nathanael's response is, Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And of course, Nathanael will ultimately come to the conclusion that Jesus is God's Messiah, because he's going to be accepting Jesus' invitation to be one of his 12 apostles. So the phrase, he shall be called the Nazarene, isn't hiding in plain sight where we can just do a search engine and find it, but it is hiding in plain sight in another way when you understand what it means to be a set-apart one. Sometimes when you're pursuing the answer to a Bible question, you have to go down and ignore a few rabbit trails and really dig down deep to try to find the answer to the questions. But the gold that you mine spiritually, when you realize God made it very, very plain that anybody who actually read the Old Testament scriptures would find it zeroing in like a laser beam on the fact that it's Jesus or nobody, that he really is that set apart one, the one whose mission was to come and save the world. Yes, Jesus is called a Nazarene. In fact, when it comes to the New Testament and Jesus is on the cross, this is kind of a sneak preview of something we're going to talk about in detail in our Gospels of Mark and John course in just a few weeks, because we're going to be dealing with Jesus's crucifixion using the Gospel of John as our primary text. When men are nailed to a cross for a Roman execution, a sign is placed on top of it indicating their crime. Thief. Thief. When it came time to come up with a sign for Jesus, Pilate has already pronounced Jesus not guilty more than once. He's given in under political pressure from the Jewish religious leaders to allow them to crucify Jesus, but there has to be a sign up here saying, what is this man's crime? And Pilate authors the sign, and it's nailed to the cross, hanging right over Jesus' head. And when the religious leaders see it, in Southern terms, they have a hissy fit. They have a conniption. They immediately want Pilate, change that sign. Why? Because that sign is written in Aramaic, the Hebrew dialect, and all the Jews can read it. It's written in Greek, the business language of the day, and it's written in Latin because Latin is the language of Rome. And when they looked at the sign in Hebrew and saw what it said, Yeshua HaNotzri V'Melech HaYehudim, it formed an acrostic. The sign essentially said, God. That's why Jesus was being put to death, because he's God in the flesh. He was set aside. He was a Nazir, a set apart one for a special task. Thanks for watching.